Um, Good day to everybody. Happy to meet you. Um, Personally, I don't know anybody in Israel that doesn't use Waze. So let's start for telling us how 100 million users become to use Waze as something that without it we cannot get out from our home.
Well, the most important thing is to have a great CEO with a vision, and so that's why it all happened, of course. So Waze has been around since 2009, and we were one of the first companies to offer free navigation. And when you look at the market today, there are basically three apps that control the market. There's Google Maps, there's Apple Maps, and there's Waze. And I think part of the change that we've kind of started is this idea that you can drive smarter. You don't need to drive, following the red lights in front of you, sitting in traffic all the time, but there has to be a smarter way. And what Waze is known for is finding that smarter way, and we called it outsmarting traffic together, right? We used our data to find ways of getting around traffic. Today, as the world grows, there are too many cars, not enough roads, and we're running out of options. And this really gets us into the carpooling and sort of, I think, the mobility that we're going for. But we see it every day statistically. You all feel it every day driving. Traffic is getting worse globally. And in that sense, when we think about our mission is really to fight traffic.
So let's talk carpooling.
Let's do it.
Because I understand that that's your next vision. I would argue that carpooling is only temporary. It's only for a few years, and then everything will be autonomous. What is your reaction about that?
So when people talk, I think I've lost my microphone. When people talk about autonomous cars, there's this beautiful future they try to tell, where all the parking lots get turned into parks, and everyone can get from anywhere to anywhere at a fraction of the price, and there's no pollution anymore, and all these great things. And there's a hidden assumption there that technology is deterministic, right? This has to be the way things go. לא שומעים? מה יהיה? שומעים? Sorry, I had to be short-tempered in Hebrew. Now, in English, I can be more relaxed. And this beautiful view of how the world's going to come to autonomy is built on a whole bunch of assumptions. And I think if one thing we learned, if you remember 10 years ago, Facebook was going to create democracy in the whole world, right? And it kind of went different ways in different sense. Same thing can happen with autonomy. You can imagine a world where traffic has gotten worse. Everyone's sitting alone in their autonomous car. The robot is driving. You're playing with your phone. You're willing to drive longer distances because you're playing with your phone. No one's building new roads. And so the traffic just continues to get worse and worse and worse. And this is the other side of autonomy that's out there. And if we break apart the hidden assumptions of autonomy, there's one assumption of electrification that was talked about today, which has nothing to do with autonomy, right? You can have electrification without it. There's a second assumption that technology is going to catch up, and you will be able to drive that. Obviously, I think we all agree is going to happen. But the third assumption, which to me is the most important one, is that we will begin sharing these cars. We were not going to drive by ourselves. And this, the mobility as a service, this revolution can happen today. It doesn't have to wait for the autonomous cars. If it doesn't happen by the time the autonomous cars come, we're all in trouble. But it can start today. And this is what Waze is focused on today. Last month, we had 110 million users use our app. If a fraction of them would take a rider with them in the car, one or two riders, we could literally make traffic free-flowing in much of the Western world. This is the change we're trying to do. Now, this is a behavioral change. It's a difficult change. We've got to match people up and find someone who lives next to you and works next to you that you're willing to take, and a tremendous amount of challenges. But from the fundamental economic problem of traffic, if we can't solve this, it doesn't matter if we're flying in planes over, if we're driving in tunnels underneath, if our cars are autonomous or driven by an Uber driver or driven by myself. If we can't get more people into every car, we're going to be sitting in traffic the same way we are today, if not worse.
Future Mobility is an organization that we established a few months ago. The idea is to find a way that Israel will be one of the leaders of implementing the revolution of transportation, what you said with all the debates, and helping the government, the municipality, to find the right policy to reduce the traffic jam, to to solve our problem. Is the technology is mature enough today, or we have to wait for a few years before trying to move the regulator?
So transportation has always been a national security issue. It's been a combination of government investment and private sector investment. Roads, trains, et cetera, historically didn't just sprout up from nowhere. And there are a whole bunch of market failures around the incentive to build a road or to build a train track. There is a critical point that we're at where government has to get involved if we want to do something about how the future is going to look. And this has to do, we just heard in the panel before, it's about electrification and what Norway did, which is amazing. I think what Norway managed to do. I think that's a great example. Same thing with transportation as a service. Today, when Ayalon is the big highway out here, and in a few hours, it'll be a huge parking lot. And you will see thousands of Israelis sitting for hours in traffic. That is a failure of leadership of government. We're not going to build more roads. But what we can do is try to align the cost of the individual with the actual amount of real estate they're taking. And so if you think about HOV lanes, high occupancy vehicle lanes, in the US, these are incentives the government gives to users to actually put more people in the car. Think about congestion pricing, what the city of London has done. If you think about the city of Sao Paulo in Brazil, where you're not allowed to drive in 1 day a week, depending on the number of your cars. We need to be able to begin raising the price of driving alone and providing other services and alternatives that the private sector knows how to do. But without this combination of carrots and sticks, it's going to be very hard to get people to change their patterns of behavior, which is really what we're all trying to do. We need to nudge them in the direction that we want. And this is really up to the governments, municipalities, departments of transportation to work hand in hand with the private sector to make this change.
And as ways, you feel that there are other places in the world that are helping you more, like in the US, maybe Brazil?
That's a politically sensitive question because I'm in Israel right now.
If you won't take it to only a story about how you enter to a new market.
So at Waze,
or decided that this is the market that you will play in.
About 3 years ago, we started a program which we call the Connected Citizens Program, where we cooperate with departments of transportation, municipalities, government organizations. We have APIs that we've opened for them for sharing data back and forth. So for example, a city might close certain roads when there's a marathon there. We might tell a city there's a pothole somewhere and they'll go out and fix it. So we've been working closely with these organizations and we see a tremendous amount of openness now to try new things. We've had cities actually subsidize carpools. We're seeing that now in Israel. I think the Jerusalem as a city is beginning to subsidize carpools. We've seen it in Palo Alto and San Mateo in the US. So this question of how do you spend your money and how do you actually provide these incentives really goes hand in hand with the larger plan. What I don't think we see yet is really national plans that look into the future. We see that in China, of course. But in the sort of Western world, we're still weak on having a national plan that's a 10-year, 20-year plan about how do we move from single occupancy vehicles to multi-occupancy vehicles and autonomy and electrification and all these things. It has to come together as a combination of incentives and sticks.
And you feel, looking in your space, that I'm a government now and I must decide if I'm supporting carpooling or maybe support Uber or Via or those stuff.
So I don't think there's a single solution. I mean, this is, I think, a critical, first of all, there are no easy answers. So anyone who's looking for a simple solution is in the wrong business. There are multiple solutions that have to work together. There's sort of last mile or first mile solutions within a city, and scooters, which are now the rage, are a big part of that, and bicycles. And okay. Scooters, bicycles, Uber-type transportation, taxis, public transit. They're great for providing the last mile solution within the city. Long haul, from the suburbs to the city, right now we're kind of limited to roads and trains. And trains we're not going to be building a lot in the near future. And this is really where carpooling is coming in. Our goal is to find people that live next to you and work next to you and be able to share that car to remove that bottleneck on the long haul. And so I definitely believe there's room for all these different solutions and different markets. Scooters is a great solution, not when it's raining, right? And so there are all these different constraints that come into play when you look at the total solution. But the direction of transportation as a service, rather than owning the car, That is, I think, what brings all these different services together, and that's what really provides the consumer change from car ownership to transportation as a service. I get asked, what would be the first indication that this happens? And I think that if you think about the US are two-car families as the average. I think moving to a one-car family is the foreseeable goal for the next 10, 15 years that the United States could take, and most countries could take. And when you think about that, the change that would take in terms of behavioral change as well as infrastructure change, it would be huge.
You are now part of Google. So there is Waze, there is Google, and people are speaking about Waymo. Do you have some strategy as a company? You are speaking with each other about the future?
So Google has been committed, or Alphabet has been committed to transportation for a long time. One of the things that's interesting is there are very few trillion-dollar businesses left for companies on this scale to actually go after. And transportation is a trillion-dollar business that's about to be radically changed. 20 years from now, the players in transportation will be very different players than who they are now. The flow of funds will be very different between how much of it goes to oil providers, how much goes to car companies, how much goes to transportation companies. It's all up in the air. And it's not clear at all who's going to do it, but it's very clear there's a lot of money on the table for whoever does crack this. And so Alphabet has Waymo, which is a self-driving car unit. It's invested through its investment arms in Uber, it's invested in Lyft, it's invested in one of the scooter companies. It obviously has Waze, and what we're doing around carpooling. There's Google Maps, and they're doing multimodal transportation. So I think Alphabet's approach is that we don't know what's going to win. We know someone's going to win, and there's going to be a tremendous amount of value to create there, but it's not clear who. And in that sense, we're all sort of part of the same thing. We're each going our own path to try and tackle the same problem.
Can you say something about the public transportation of the future? Because till now we talked about, our car, we won't have a car, we'll use carpooling or maybe something else, but there are people that are saying in the future, the public transportation model will be changed as well.
So, there's a saying in political science, where you sit is where you stand. So I was listening to some of the previous speakers, right? So if I make chips, then it's all up to the chip manufacturer to make it, right? And if I was a telecom player, I would say it's all about 5G. Well, 5G will solve everything, right? So each one has their own interests. I obviously believe that public transit is going to become smaller and smaller vehicles. Today, we basically have large vehicles, trains, buses, that aggregate from 2 points. But we're going to get to smaller and smaller vehicles where carpooling really is the smallest vehicle. When you think about it, of taking a few different people on a very specific route. And the idea of having a fixed route that you need to aggregate the people to it, rather than have the public transit go to the people where they are, I think is a change that's happening now. You see that with like UberX and Lyft Line in that sense, as more people come in. Via has done a phenomenal job in New York. Everyone's using Via, which is basically a public transit vehicle that changes its routes according to where the people are. Right? And this is kind of the direction we're going to with all these different solutions, leveraging smartphones and GPS and all these kinds of things. And I think the most important thing is that autonomous cars are going to happen. I don't think there's any question about it. There's a lot of question of when. And I personally believe it's going to be a lot further out than people think it's going to be for a variety of reasons. But the thing is that this change in mindset and the technological changes we can do today on the existing infrastructure are going to determine how self-driving cars are used in the future. And this, to me, is why we have to make the changes now and not wait for some magical thing to happen in the future to move us around.
So I see that we have to stop talking. We didn't speak something, maybe a last sentence about mobility as a service. Maybe the business model is the one that will happen much more before matureness of all the disruption that we have today in the industry.
So I think that the number one constraint across mobility as a service and autonomous cars is actually the business models. I mean, this is what's constraining. If you think about UberX and Lyft today, they're constrained by drivers. If they could lower the price further, they could increase demand, but they don't have enough people willing to drive. There's huge churn between the drivers, between the companies, right? There's these fundamental business model questions. Autonomous cars, we all are focused on the technology, but having a business model that can afford to buy hundreds of millions of extremely expensive vehicles and sensors, et cetera, and to pay back a reasonable return to your investors, that's much hazier when you actually begin running the numbers on this stuff. So the question of the business models, I think, is really going to determine the output much more than technology. And it's easy for us to talk about the technology because that's the challenge that we're in right now. But as far as I'm concerned, that's already done. That's solved. It's a question just of time and money. And to me, the more interesting question is, who will actually develop the right business model to allow this to scale? I think Tesla did a great job of showing that you can build a product that people love relatively overnight compared to car companies, right? And you can build an electric car company that people would rather buy than the existing companies. But they still have challenges producing the cars. And the amount of cars they produce is a fraction of the world. The amount of batteries being produced is a fraction. And now if we're talking about replacing hundreds of millions of cars, there's a production and a capacity question which is overshadowing over everything. And I'm not even talking about who's going to pay for it. So to me, these are the bigger questions about how do we actually get to an autonomous world. But the change in behavior can actually happen today.
So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Coming here from, you're saying now New York, not LA. Thank you very much, and thank you very much to everybody.
Question over there, but yeah.
Do you think?
Sorry, I didn't hear?
Do you think that in the near future, mobility as a free right will diminish from the world and we'll have to buy it or to pay for it in one way or another for the mobility as a commodity?
So I think mobility is a commodity.
Now it's free. Now we don't pay for mobility. I can move. Okay, I pay for the expenses, but I have the right for mobility.
So I'm not sure exactly. We pay a tremendous amount of money for our mobility today. Okay, the ownership of a car in the U.S. is like $8,000 a year. So we pay a tremendous amount. The resources are not allocated efficiently. But I think when you're talking about mobility as a service, you are talking about tremendous savings as society and much more efficient transportation. We use it. It's a long discussion. I don't think we use it too much. I think we use our infrastructure inefficiently. And we could be much more efficient in how we use it. If you think about the United States, for example, we built our cities in a way that's around the cars. And if aliens came today and looked at us, they'd say, this is a world of cars, and humans support the cars, right? We build our houses around them, we build our roads around them. 40% of the land in Los Angeles is dedicated to cars. Every car in America has 3 parking spots to choose from, and we use our cars 4% of the time, right? Fundamentally, we are servicing the cars. And so this is, I think, one of the things I had to change is putting the people in the center and trying to build our infrastructure around people. That's a whole sort of another discussion on it, but definitely, I don't think anyone thinks we're using our infrastructure efficiently today.